Hi, this is Danielle Karapkin speaking to you from Thornhill, Ontario for webyeshiva.org, and we are studying the Moreh Nevukhim, Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed. Last week, we had just given a general introduction to try and understand why the Rambam divides the Moreh Nevukhim into three separate sections, because we're just starting section 2, and it seems to be a direct continuation from section 1. At the end of section 1, the Rambam had provided the various proofs and arguments that were provided by a competing philosophical system known as the Kalam that was prevalent in his time among certain religious thinkers, to try and argue three basic ideas about God. Number one, that God exists. Number two, that God is unitary. And number three, that God is incorporeal, that he's completely not related to the physical world. The Rambam feels that the system that is promulgated by the Kalam, notably the fact that they believe in atomism, that the world is made of a certain very, very tiny particles, is an unacceptable way of looking at the world, and therefore will not aid a person in connecting with God. But before he could provide us with the correct, what is in his opinion, the correct way of looking at the world to come to a conclusion about God, he had to disprove the Kalam first, and he had to show that their premises were unfounded and that they were mistaken in a number of areas. And we now are in the second section of Moreh Nevukhim, where he lays down in the introduction Aristotelian premises, basic principles that are, or one could perhaps call axiomatic truths that have already been proven by Aristotle and his commentaries, certain facts about physics and metaphysics about our universe. And once he has presented these premises, then he'll be able to go ahead and use them to prove or to argue for the three arguments that we just mentioned: the existence of God, his unitary nature, and his incorporeality. So that's where we are. We looked at an essay last week from Professor Menachem Kellner, who tries to suggest that since the primary theme, it would seem, of section 2 of the guide is to discuss prophecy and revelation, and specifically the prophecy of the Torah, and how central of a principle of faith it is for the Jewish people, perhaps the Rambam feels that he needs to argue for not only God's existence, but God's involvement or connection to the physical world. And part of that is also the act of creation, which we're going to get to in the course of this first section of section 2, to explain how God can insert himself into our physical reality and present the individual and present a nation with the prophetic experience. That's the theory. You can accept it or not accept it as far as the structure of the guide, but now we're going to go into the 26 premises that the Rambam lays down in the introduction from Aristotle to prove the truths about God. The first 25 we had mentioned are things which the Rambam believes have already been proven. They have already been demonstrated using logical proofs about the physics and metaphysics of the universe, and therefore the Rambam, who has said this a number of times throughout the guide, states that this is not a traditional or classical philosophical tome which goes through sometimes very laborious proofs to prove different philosophical principles using logical arguments, which was very much in vogue in the medieval world. He says, I'm not doing that. I'm just going to provide you with what has already been decided upon in the Aristotelian philosophical world. And then I'm going to present you the 26th premise, which, although many believe has already been proven, I argue that it has not yet been proven. Okay, so that's where we are. And in order to put all of this into a 30-minute or approximately 30-minute presentation, we're going to just give you a handout that, as we do every week, we We make this available both on Facebook in the Facebook group Shiur in Moreh Nevukhim, and it's also available on webyeshiva.org on their website in the course description for today's lesson on Moreh Nevukhim section 2, the introduction part 2, the 26 Aristotelian premises to prove God. So the first premise that the Rambam lays down is that nothing can have infinite magnitude. There's no such thing. You cannot have a house or a creature or anything that's part of the physical plane that can be infinite in its size or in its mass. That's premise number one. We had seen a little bit of this about the impossibility of one unitary item being infinite in size or mass or volume. We had seen that in the discussion of the Mutakalimun back in chapter 73. But this is also accepted by Aristotelians. But by the way, when it comes to infinity, the Mutakalimun had rejected all different types of infinite things, including infinite sequences, which Aristotelians do accept, which we're going to see shortly. Number two, there cannot be an infinite number of finite objects simultaneously. So which means that if you have a whole bunch of little action figures, you cannot have an infinite number of action figures, no matter how many your child wants to accumulate, or infinite number of Lego pieces. There can be no infinite amount of something that exists in the world simultaneously. And remember that the key issue here is there cannot be simultaneity of an infinite number of items, but can there be a consecutive sequence that goes on ad infinitum? That we'll see according to Aristotelians there can be. Number three, that there cannot be an infinite series of causes and effects even among non-physical things. And the Rambam therefore submits that according to Aristotle, there must be something called a first cause. Now, this does not mean that the world at some point was created. The world has eternally existed just as this first cause has eternally existed, because according to Aristotle, this divine being, whom Aristotle calls the first cause or the first mover, is a being with sentience, but also does not have directed volition, which means that it is what it is. That being is what it is. And as a result of its being, it emanates all of reality. It's not that it was a volitional decision of this being to create. That's not what Aristotle believes. He believes that this being is so transcendent that it doesn't have human volitional decision-making processes, but rather it as a product of its perfect existence, it automatically, almost like a radio tower, emanates reality, but it is the ultimate cause of all that exists. You cannot have an infinite sequence of causes and effects. There must be, at some point, a first cause for everything that exists, even if that existence is an infinite existence. We're going to continue this discussion as we go along, and you'll see why this is such an important point. Number four, there are four types of change, and it seems that the Rambam here is talking about physical bodies. Substance, what he calls change of substance, which means something can come into existence and cease to exist, what we call generation and corruption. Number two, something can increase or decrease in quantity. That's another kind of change. Number three, something can change qualitatively, which means something can become drier or moister, or environmental conditions can come about that will create more dryness or more moistness, coldness or hotness. And that's a qualitative change. And the fourth kind of change is what's called a change of place, which is a product of motion. Something can be moved from place to place. That change is called motion. Number five, every motion is a change from potentiality to actuality. These are terms that are contained in Aristotelian writings. Something exists in potentia. It means that it is waiting to be transformed or to be moved into another form. So for example, and once it is moved into that final form, it is that form in actuality. So a pile of bricks is a potential brick wall, but it exists in potentia. And then when it moves through the efforts of the builder to turn those bricks into a brick wall, so then it is a brick wall in actuality. Now, we don't normally think in these terms. We don't think about a pile of bricks as a brick wall in potentiality, but that's Aristotle's model. Number 6, there are two different types of motion, which means that how do things change from one state to another? How do they move from one state to another? So there are two ways. One is that they move essentially, meaning that there is something within the object itself or within the laws of physics that causes this object to move, such as a rock that was thrown in the middle of the air. At some point, if you throw it up, it'll stop and then it will start to move again in a downward direction. That downward movement is what we would call essential motion because it is a product of some kind of natural phenomenon that is inherent within existence. But there's also something called accidental motion, which is something that is not part of the essential nature of things, but it is decided that something should move because of some external force. So the example is the rock being thrown upwards. A human being makes a decision, or a truck drives over a bed of gravel and causes a pebble to fly upwards. That's an accidental motion of the pebble because it is not something that is occurring naturally as a result of its rockness. So it can be forced, it can be incidental, which means that something can move, and this is again not the normal way that we think, but if a garment is black, Aristotle says that its blackness is an accident or an incidental attribute of the garment. When the garment moves, its attributes move along together with it, incidentally. So that's what he means by incidental motion. Number 3, it can be partial, which means it's very similar to incidental, such that a subset of the object is moving is also moving, such as a nail that is embedded within a ship moves whenever the ship moves. It's not because the nail essentially is moving, but rather it's moving as a product of the ship. Sorry, just got to get rid of the little spider coming down. Okay, number 7. Anything changeable is divisible. Okay, this is the next sort of principle of Aristotle. Anything that is subject to change is subject to divisibility, and it's part of the physical world. That's the nature of the physical world, for things to be divisible. So therefore, anything movable is divisible because movement is a subset of change. So if something is subject to change, it's subject to motion, and therefore anything that is subject to motion can be divided. Conversely, anything indivisible cannot move. Ergo, anything indivisible cannot be a body, since all bodies are subject to motion. So this is going to become relevant in our discussion of God, but this is again just the 7th premise. Number 8, anything in accidental motion must eventually come to rest. So we talked about accidental motion being non-essential to the object, not intrinsic to the object. So for example, the rock thrown upwards must eventually come down. Number 9, if A moves B, then A must also be in motion. Anything that moves something else must itself be in motion when it is causing movement. Number 10, there are two types of things existing within a body, and both types are called forces within the body. There are accidental forces, which we would call accidents, such as color and other non-essential attributes, such that without the body, the accident ceases to exist. But you could have the body without its accident in theory, okay? But you have something called an essential force or an essential attribute of an object, such that without that essential force, the body ceases to exist. And this is generally what Aristotle calls for the form of the object. When you talk about matter and form, if you have something which is the form of a physical body, without that form, the body ceases to exist in its essential state. So, for example, a wooden chair is made up the matter of the chair. The wood is the chair's matter, and the form is the shape and size of it being a chair. That form originated in the mind of the carpenter. It was therefore, and then transferred when the carpenter built the chair into the chair itself. By removing the form, you no longer have a chair. Now, you could remove the veneer, the varnish that's on the chair. It will still be a chair. You could remove other non-essential attributes of the chair, and it'll still be a chair. If, let's say, you painted the chair and you remove the paint, it's still a chair. But once you remove the form of the chair by cutting off its legs or its back or whatever it is, it ceases to be a chair. Number 11. Of those forces within the body, some are divisible upon division of the body, and some are indivisible upon division of the body. And that's just a very simple premise that if I divide something in half, sometimes the attributes of that body will be divided as well. And sometimes those attributes will not be divided, but will only remain with one of those portions. So if things like warmth and color, maybe if I take something that's warm and has a red color and I cut it in half, then both halves will be warm and red. But let's say I take a human being and I amputate the human being's leg. So the soul and the intellect remain only with the part of the human being that is the majority of the human being, and the leg no longer possesses the soul or the intellect. So therefore, there are certain attributes that are divisible when you divide the body, and certain attributes which are indivisible and will only linger with one of the two pieces that are, or more pieces that are cut apart. Number 12, every force that is distributed throughout a body is as finite as the body itself. And so therefore, if something is evenly distributed throughout the body, and apparently we're not talking about the soul, because the soul is purported to exist eternally. So the soul cannot fall into this category as being something that's distributed throughout a body. It's actually not part of the physical plane, and therefore does not fit in this category. But let's say you have a force such as the redness of a garment. If it's equally distributed throughout the body, then once the garment ceases to exist, its redness ceases to exist as well. Number 13, every change is finite except for motion. And motion can continue ad infinitum in theory, but every other kind of change. Remember, we talked about the four different kinds of changes. The first one we call this substantial change, either coming into being or breaking down or ceasing to exist. Those are finite, those processes. Things changing in quantity, things changing in quality. All of those things are finite changes, which means they only exist for a finite period of time, and then that change comes to a stop. The only thing that does not come to a stop, that can potentially exist in infinity, is motion. But even then, and this is something that Aristotle goes into in great lengths in both his physics and his metaphysics, is that the celestial bodies, Aristotle maintains, are constantly in motion on an infinite basis. And the reason why they can move infinitely is because they are constantly in a circular motion, retracing the same trajectory that they have always been doing ad infinitum. And we're not going to go into that proof in any length, but so he says even motion can only be perpetual if it is circular motion. Number 14, going back to our four types of changes, motion is the logical precursor to all other types of change. What he means to say is like this: when bodies are in motion, and this is really the way that Aristotle explains how the things that exist in our world, in our physical world, have come into existence. He explains that they come into existence through the motion of the celestial spheres that exist above our planet. That motion of those spheres causes qualitative change, which means that causes things to either come into existence or things to break down. I'm sorry, excuse me, it creates qualitative change of conditions, of the elements either becoming warmer, hotter, changing, becoming more close, becoming less close to the physical things that exist in our world. This results in substantive change of compound things that exist in our world, like rocks and plants and things like that, to either come into existence or break down. And that results in quantitative change. Once something has come into existence, it grows, it has a certain span of life, and then eventually it either gets larger, smaller, and so forth. So therefore, motion is the type of change which is the antecedent, the logical antecedent, and also the chronological antecedent, what we would call the efficient cause of all other kinds of change. Time is an accident of motion. That is, without motion, time does not exist. So for the example that is brought in the commentaries is a sleeping person whose intellect is not in motion does not experience time. Time is a product of movement. But motion, so that's the first postulate. Sort of like, if the tree falls in the forest when no one's there, does it make a noise? Essentially, what Aristotle suggests is that if there's no motion, there is no time. But motion also cannot exist without time. And that seems to be more intuitive to us. Ergo, that which is not subject to motion is also not subject to time. If something cannot be moved, then it exists independently of time. So that's, again, another mind-bending discussion, which will be relevant in terms of God. Number 16, a thing which is not a body cannot be perceived in terms of quantity, that is more than one. Usually anything that is not a body is perceived as unitary, unless it is a force within a body, in which case its multiplicity is linked to the multiplicity of bodies. There is an exception to this. When you have a series of causes and effects, even in the non-physical plane, you can have multiple items existing, such as different types of angels, where one type of angel is the efficient cause of another type of angel. And we're going to talk a little bit more about angels as we go along. The Rambam is going to link those angelic forces to the celestial forces or to the celestial spheres. And you'll see why this is a relevant discussion later on. Number 17, everything in motion is moved by a mover. That's intuitive, right? The mover may be outside the moved object, that is, such as a stone moved by a hand, or inside the moved object, such as a living creature that moves through the mover its animating force that is inherent or essential to the creature that is moving. Number 18, anything that changes from potential to actual is changed from without, meaning that you need an external mover in order to change something from its potential state to its actual state. So you have those, remember, we go back to our discussion of the bricks. The bricks cannot form themselves into a brick wall. They need an external mover. Or wooden beams change from a potential structure to an actual structure via an external builder. And furthermore, a corollary of this is that if there is an impediment which prevents a thing from changing from potential to actual, the thing which removes the impediment is the new external mover or changer. So for example, you had a contractor or a builder who was in the process of changing a pile of bricks to a brick wall, and then he got sick. So the potential brick wall was impeded in being converted into an actual brick wall. But then a new builder takes over the construction project and he becomes the new external mover or changer. 19. There are two types of existence. There's necessary existence and there's possible, or what is known in philosophy as a contingent existence. A thing which exists because of a cause or causes is by definition contingent or a possible existent. Number 20, a thing which is necessarily existent, and as we'll see, that thing can only be God, has no cause which precedes it or causes it to exist. Number 20 is a direct corollary of number 19. Number 21, if a thing is caused by two things, even though each of the two components is not distinguishable in the product, its existence is a result of the compound of those multiple things. It is therefore not necessarily existent. In other words, one could have, this is also a corollary of 19, one could have argued that since I cannot identify any one thing that is the direct cause of the existence of B. Let's say A and B give rise to C, but you need A and B together. A cannot cause C, and B cannot cause C independently. So you might have argued that C therefore is necessarily existent. No, since you can identify that A, when combined with B, gives rise to C, C is no longer necessarily existent. Number 22. Every body is composed of two things, matter and form. This is classic Aristotelianism. Their combination invariably results in accidents of each body, the accidents being quantity, shape, and position. This is something that we've discussed multiple times in discussing Aristotelian philosophy, so we won't spend a lot of time on it now. Number 23, a thing which possesses potential to become active but is not currently active has the possibility of never becoming active. So, for example, that pile of bricks may never become a wall, or a piece of metal has the potential to become a sword, but it's possible that it will never be forged into a sword. It's possible that it will never become a sword. But something which cannot exist in potentia must always be active, and this will be relevant in our discussion of God. Number 24, anything which can exist in potentia must possess matter, because potential existence is directly related to material stuff of our world. And we're going to discuss this further when we talk about the difference between our physical existence versus the celestial realm. Number 25, the foundational construction of every physical body is matter and form. A mover is required to endow matter, which is potentiality, with form, thus endowing it with actuality. So the terms matter and form are always used in consonance with potentiality and actuality. Matter that has not yet been imbued with form exists in potentiality. Once it is imbued with form, it exists in actuality. So you have a pile of bricks that you do not yet have the form of a brick wall. It's a brick wall in potentia. Once that is imbued with the form of a wall, because the builder puts the bricks together and builds a wall, it is a brick wall in actuality. So the form of the wall was imbued within those bricks. So, for example, again, the formless piece of metal requires a mover to convert it into a sword. And once it is endowed with its form, it now exists as a sword in actuality, or the brick wall, whatever it is. Now, premise 26 is something that the Rambam had said that is different from the first 25 premises, because the first 25 have definitively been proven using logical argumentation. The Rambam feels that premise 26 has not been proven, and that's why we put a dividing line between it and the first 25. The world is infinite, that is, it has eternally existed. Now, of course, this will certainly present a challenge to the biblical narrative of creation, which the Rambam will deal with later on. But this is one of the Aristotelian premises, and the Rambam wishes first and foremost to remain faithful to Aristotelianism when discussing God, because he believes that that system is the most correct system in describing reality, and therefore he's going to concede for the moment that this premise is what he will be working with, since it is part of Aristotle's sort of corpus of philosophy. Time and movement are eternal and perpetual and in actual existence. Hence, there must be a body that exists in actuality that is in perpetual motion. This is a fifth element that is different from the temporal four elements of our physical world. So there is something that is in constant actuality, that is in constant motion, and is doing so in an infinite sequence. Okay, So it's going on ad infinitum, this motion. And as we'll see, this motion is what gives rise and is responsible for all of physical reality in our world. And this has gone on, this system has gone on for eternity. Now, the Rambam concludes by pointing out a very interesting extreme dichotomy between the two schools of philosophy, the Mutakalimun and the Aristotelians. Aristotelian commentators argue that premise number 26 has been proven, just as the first 25. The Mutakalimun argue that it has been proven to be impossible. And if you go back to the first section, chapter 73, and look at premise number 11, the Mutakalimun believed that nothing can exist infinitely, not motion, not a universe, not even something that is ethereal or not related to the four elements of earth, wind, fire, and water. There is nothing that can exist infinitely outside of God. And therefore, the Mutakalimun have squarely rejected the 26th premise as being impossible. If you recall, the argument that the Kalamists had made to argue for the impossibility of infinity is because they had invested so much in the human imagination faculty. Anything which is imaginable is possible. If something is not imaginable, it's not possible. Since the human mind cannot imagine something existing infinitely, it is therefore not really possible in the real world. In other words, the epistemology of the Kalamists is that our minds define reality, and if our minds cannot imagine an infinite universe, then an infinite universe cannot exist. Aristotle decouples or uncouples the epistemology of existence with the ontology of existence, using these highfalutin terms, and says that the mind, just because it cannot imagine it, is not the arbiter of what is truly existent. Maimonides maintains that as far as this 26th premise is concerned, it has neither been proven nor disproven, but rather remains in the realm of possible. And therefore, we're going to suspend judgment, but we will concede for the moment, just for argument's sake, that the world has existed for eternity. And even with that argument, even with that sort of given or premise, which we will later reject, but even working with that premise, the Rambam feels that using all of these 26 premises, we will be able to demonstrate the three things about God that we wished to set out to do, which is his existence, his unitary nature, and his incorporeality. Now, this was all a very technical chapter, and we're going to try to break down the next several chapters in a much more, I guess, maybe palatable format that will not be as technical as today's presentation was. So I apologize for the sort of technical premises of Aristotelian philosophy, but it's sort of necessary in order for us to proceed. We will be making reference to any number of these premises as we go along through the beginning of section 2. And with this, we will call it a day. So I hope everyone is doing well. Here in Canada, it is Thanksgiving today. So wish everyone who's Canadian a happy Thanksgiving. If you're in the United States, a happy Columbus Day or Indigenous Day, as it's now being called. And for everyone else, especially those in Eretz Yisrael, Yom Tov. Take care, everyone.